I think some of the best CFOs and CEOs that I've worked with are great at communication. They have an open door policy, and that doesn't mean that they are necessarily always going to take all of the ideas or the conversations and implement them, but they allow conversations to flow freely without judgment. And I think that ultimately gives them a better understanding of all aspects of what's going on in the business. And therefore, they're able to trust their team to implement the vision because everybody's had input into it.
Welcome to the Loyalty by Leadership podcast, where I, Darrell Moon, your host, interview people who have been inspired by leaders, as well as leaders who strive to inspire, where we discuss leadership insights and strategies that add value and create loyalty. Welcome to Loyalty by Leadership podcast. I'm Darrell Moon, your host, and I'm so excited to have Jamie Greenleaf with me. She is the co-founder of Fiduciary in a Box, and I'm going to let her introduce herself real quickly.
Hi, nice to meet everybody. My name is Jamie Greenleaf, co-founder of Fiduciary in a Box and Fiduciary Consultant. I'm excited to have this conversation with you today. Just a little background on myself. I actually grew up in the retirement industry. My mother founded a firm back in 1981 when the 401k code was coming to the marketplace. For the last 30 years, I've really assisted plan sponsors in building fiduciarily sound retirement programs to deliver better outcomes, and got interested in what was going on in the healthcare space about 7 years ago because it was defunding some of my employers' retirement programs. So excited to talk about my journey.
Wonderful. And Jamie, I've known Jamie for a few years now. I consider her a friend, love her passion for helping employers, and I'm excited to get into this conversation today about loyalty by leadership. So, Jamie, share with us maybe some stories or people in your life over the years that have produced a lot of loyalty within you, and tell me why. What did they do to build loyalty?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, my mother, I had big footprints to kind of fill. She really was mission driven. She believed if you did the right thing for the client and for the person that you were talking to, it would always come back tenfolds to you. My father used to get frustrated that he would say, $1 or $1 million didn't matter to Duran. She was all about having meaningful impact on people. So that was probably my first introduction into somebody that really built this base around being the best you can by having meaningful impact on people through loyalty. And I think that translated into the things that I was doing with plan sponsors. A lot of my CFOs and CEOs and HR members would sit around and we would talk about new, outside of the box ideas around how to have better impact on their employees by allowing their employees to retire with dignity. And sometimes we took the road least traveled, like auto enrollment and auto escalation. And these were concepts that my investment team would have to kind of follow me down this rabbit hole and trust that I was leading them to something that was actually going to have meaningful impact on their employees. So I would say that second, my plan sponsors really built, the kind of that loyalty within me because they followed me down a path that was least traveled and that truly has delivered better outcomes for their employees.
So I love what you just said. In fact, I just have to ask, have you heard of the book, The Go-Giver?
I have not, no.
So it's a very popular business book where it's a fictional story where this young man learns a concept that he just goes through this epiphany. And it's this concept that if we always expect to give more than what we expect to receive, will be wildly successful in both our personal life and our career. And it sounds like your mother, being mission driven, was far more focused on what she was expecting to give and what she offered and what the meaning she had, rather than what she was getting back in return. And it was very successful for her.
Yeah, I would agree. And it kind of reminds me of when I was a child, and also when I had my children, reading the Giving book, which was kind of a similar thing, not in relationship to business, but kind of around, just continuously giving. And ultimately at the end of the day, it's, very fulfilling. And I think it makes you successful, not only from a business standpoint, but also just a personal standpoint as well.
Nice. So your mother's a great example. Do you have any other examples of either business leaders or personal family leaders or social leaders?
Yeah, so I think, again, talking about some of my plan sponsors, they were innovative before it was cool to be innovative. And they had trust in their organization and people within their organization to execute some of the things that we put together, and ideas that we had. So I see several of them as being individuals that I look up to and learn from. I was just telling you about Don Trone, who was kind of the father of Fiduciary. I think of him as well as somebody that kind of stepped out of the norm to kind of build where other people weren't. He went where other people weren't going. So I kind of see that as another person as well.
Nice. Now, some people may not know what a plan sponsor is. Yeah. So we're talking about business leaders, correct?
Correct.
We're talking about business, like CEOs who want to build a health plan or a retirement plan for their employees. So you're talking about business leaders, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Business CFOs, CEOs, HR, anybody that is really there to support the employees and to build their business.
Well, and you mentioned something about they trusting their team.
Yeah.
Go a little deeper in that. They had a team as a business leader that they had put together that they trusted. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about how that trust built loyalty within that team.
Yeah, I think some of the best CFOs and CEOs that I've worked with are great at communication. They have an open door policy, and that doesn't mean that they are necessarily always going to take all of the ideas or the conversations and implement them, but they allow conversations to flow freely without judgment. And I think that ultimately gives them a better understanding of all aspects of what's going on in the business, and therefore they're able to trust their team to implement the vision because everybody's had input into it. I used to have my plan sponsors, my retirement committees, sit down and put together a mission statement, because it wasn't necessarily about check the box having a retirement plan or check the box having a healthcare plan. It wasn't about fiduciary liabilities and responsibilities and duties. It was about, what are you looking for this benefit to actually provide to your employees? And by developing that mission statement, everybody was on the same page. And I think that's what a lot of the employers that I've worked with that have been so successful in kind of trusting their team is because they put those mission statements together, whether it was around a business movement or action they were taking, or building a better benefit program.
Well, and I'd love to dive into those mission statements just a little bit, because I've asked a lot of business leaders over the years, why do you buy healthcare benefits? Why do you put together a plan? What is your mission for why you're doing this? And I can tell you what I've heard a lot, but I'd love to hear what you've heard as you've helped employers build those mission statements. Why do they offer benefits? Why do they offer retirement plans? What are you hearing in those mission statements?
I think, when we talk about the retirement side, it's because they wanted their employees to be able to retire with dignity. It wasn't about them as an employer. It was about their employees. And I find that to be the same in the healthcare space. It's not about, oh, I have to offer this in order to retain and recruit and reward my employees. It's about how can I support my employees in having better health and clarity and financial stability. And that's why I'm putting together these benefits. So when they develop the mission statement, it's about the end user, who is the employee. It's about the experience that that employee is going to have, that well-being that that employee is going to have. Because we know that if an employee is financially stable and healthy, their productivity levels go up, and ultimately that's beneficial for everybody. So those are the types of mission statements we would see. It was really around that end user.
And my guess is that by building their mission around the person, again, expecting to give more than you expect to receive, it by its very nature created enormous levels of loyalty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why many, I graduated college and started educating employees on the value of taking money out of their paycheck and putting it into this thing called the 401k plan. When they had money purchased, or they had profit sharing plans, and they had defined benefit plans, and they had to trust that their employer was acting in their best interest by withholding these dollars, much like they do in the healthcare side.
Right.
What's really interesting is when I went back 20 plus years later, the same employee was working there and would come up and say, thank you so much for spending time to really show me why there was value in doing this. And more importantly, an employee that's with you for 20, 30 years, that is, a huge value to an employer. And that's the same when it comes to the healthcare benefits. It's providing them with something that is actually needed and appropriate and a value that that employee can't get anywhere else. And that keeps your employees' longevity and builds loyalty to, do their best work for that organization.
Well, and I think you just said something really important, and that is that they can't get someplace else.
Yeah.
All too often, it's easy to check a box and say, we got to do it because everybody else does it. So if we want to recruit, we want to retain, we want to create loyalty, let's do the same. But as you've probably seen, creating that uniqueness that's different and that's something that's special that they can't just get someplace else is one of the most important factors at building loyalty.
Absolutely. And I think what's really important is that you can't, as an employer, whether you're a CFO or a CEO, you can't be silent in these conversations around your healthcare or your retirement program. You have to be an active participant. You have to have proactive plan designs. You have to ask questions, because otherwise you're, in a vehicle and somebody else is driving the car to a destination that you don't know and may hit a couple of your employees on the way over. So you want to make sure that you're in the driver's seat and that you have the experts sitting at the table with you, but that you're driving the conversation and relying on those experts to direct you, to provide you with directions on, how to build the appropriate plan. But you need to be a proactive participant in these conversations. Otherwise, it's very difficult to build the right benefit package.
Yeah, I would agree. So you've shared some loyalty building strategies you've seen from others. Are there some loyalty strategies that you strive to apply that maybe we haven't talked about yet in building loyalty amongst your teams and amongst the people you work with?
Yeah, my teams tend to be relatively small, but that said, I think that I've taken a lot of kind of pages from other people's playbooks, and it's mainly around communication. Having an open honest conversation to me is the most important aspect of building loyalty within the team. Because without that, once you lose that trust of other team members, it's very difficult to get it back. And I think there's some saying about the time that it takes to build trust is over a period of time that expands, a year or two, and the time that it takes to lose that trust, it could happen
in a second.
so I think, in building loyalty, it's really around keeping that trust. And how do you keep that trust, to me, is open communications.
Well, and along those lines, we mentioned earlier how important it is for leaders to build an environment where people feel comfortable in sharing their opinions.
Yep.
And that has a lot to do with communication. That is not an easy thing to do.
No.
One of the most difficult things as a leader to do is to create an environment where people feel safe challenging the leader.
Yeah.
And then yet it's one of the most probably helpful things that a leader wants is to be challenged so that as a group you come to the best decision. Have you found that yourself?
I have. I think it's really important too that as a leader you set expectations so that if somebody comes to you with an idea and that idea is not used, that it's not taken as you didn't listen to that person.
Yeah.
So I think, it's important to be a good listener. It's important to have open communication, but I think it's also important to set expectations on what that means. And that way, maybe your feelings get hurt, but it doesn't necessarily mean that person doesn't come to you again with a new conversation. So I think that expectation piece is important.
Well, and by setting those expectations, they know that it's okay to share any idea. And it's okay if it may seem like a crazy idea. Sometimes the best ideas are crazy ideas.
That's absolutely right. What's Henry Ford used to say, if you ask the people what they'd want, they'd say a faster horse. So he had a crazy idea. And I think that's where innovation comes from. It comes from people thinking outside of that box and having the ability to have that conversation and flush it out. And sometimes flushing it out means it goes right down the toilet, but other times it means that it becomes something that's really innovative and unique and new. So,
yeah, I love the book, It's Your Ship. Have you ever heard of the book, It's Your Ship?
I have not read it, but I definitely know what you're talking about.
And, here this leader created this environment where all the sailors felt like this admiral cared about their personal long-term career goals. And so by asking the sailors, how can we build a better ship? One sailor said, well, how many times we paint the battleship every year? It's like every month so you can imagine the sailor painting. And he said, have you ever heard of stainless steel, bolts and nuts and washers? Because imagine the sailors painting the same streaks of rust month after month. And the leader's like, it's a crazy idea. It's like, well, maybe we should try to replace all the bolts, nuts, and washers on the boat. Yeah. And we could spend a whole lot more time becoming the best performing battleship instead of painting the ship. And they did. And it's just a great example of how that admiral would have never come up with that idea.
Yeah.
To just replace all the bolts.
Well, having had a boat or two in my lifetime, I can tell you painting the boat is very painful and expensive. So I get it.
Nice. Anything else that comes to mind that you'd like to share on this podcast around building loyalty and leadership?
No, I think setting expectations and having an open door policy is what I've seen some of the best leaders, kind of be successful in building a really strong organization. And also, I think as a leader, you have to be true to yourself. I don't think you can be somebody that you're not. And recognizing your strengths and weaknesses, we all have them, and trying to kind of be able to acknowledge them in a way that gets the right team around you.
Well, and authenticity and vulnerability are one of the traits of a good leader that builds loyalty. So I love that you shared that. Jamie, tell us about Fiduciary in a Box. For those listeners who aren't aware of what you do, give us an idea, talk a little bit about your services and how they benefit companies.
Sure. So taking what I learned in the retirement space and applying it to the healthcare space, we built a playbook for running a fiduciary process on your healthcare plan. We took it out to some litigators and somebody that worked at the Department of Labor and said, how else can we help employers really streamline this process to ensure that they're delivering better outcomes to their employees and reducing their liabilities? We got some great feedback and took it out to the market, and employers said, this is a great playbook, but I'm not going to run it. It's way too long and cumbersome. So we brought it back to the office and made it into software. So it's really like TurboTax, which allows you to streamline the fiduciary process on your healthcare plan, but also in a collaborative way. So we don't assume that the employer is just going to do this on their own. We know that there's a lot of people sitting around the table, their benefit brokers, their TPAs, their PBMs. And so all of them are able to participate in this, but it really allows them to establish, adhere, and document their their fiduciary process on their healthcare plan through collaboration with other partners.
Well, and share with the group why that has become so important, particularly because of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021.
Absolutely. So ERISA, that was formed in 1974, has always covered retirement programs as well as health and welfare programs. But health and welfare programs never really thought of themselves as being an ERISA governed plan. As employers started to have to cost share with their employees and withhold dollars out of their employees' paychecks, they had a fiduciary obligation to be good stewards with those dollars that they withheld from their employees. So they needed to act in the best interest of the employee for an exclusive benefit and at a reasonable price. And it was difficult for employers to actually deem what was reasonable and kind of really understand their healthcare plan because there was lack of transparency. After the Consolidated Appropriations Act came out in 2021, employers then started to get access to their information and their data around cost and quality. And they have to, but now really have to apply a fiduciary standard, much like they do on their retirement plan, to their healthcare plan. And unfortunately, in the retirement space, there are organizations that act in a co-fiduciary manner to help that employer. In the healthcare space, they are not quite there yet. So employers are really struggling to actually have a prudent process that meets the fiduciary standards. And that's where Fiduciary in a Box comes in. And some of the things that we can support them in are really running that fiduciary process just like they do on the retirement program.
Well, and if you would, talk about if you're not a good fiduciary, what are the risks to an employer and what happened in the retirement industry? And now, because they're going to be held to a fiduciary standard in the healthcare space, what are the risks of not becoming a good fiduciary?
Yeah. So in the retirement space, it took about 20 years before we saw the first class action lawsuit against employers. And then quickly, many employers were kind of in the same boat where they were found to have a fiduciary breach on the retirement program. And it costs significant dollars for those employers to settle those lawsuits. And they continue today. But it's been, 4 or 5 years since the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and we already have 4 employers who have had class action lawsuits against them for fiduciary breach. And we anticipate that this is going to run kind of very similar to what happened in the retirement space, but on steroids. We definitely are seeing the attorneys that did the class action lawsuits in the retirement space understand how to plug that same, rinse and repeat structure in the healthcare space. And unfortunately, because employers have been kind of in the dark, and that the healthcare ecosystem has major conflicts of interest. That's because that's how business was done. Employers are now just starting to understand how these conflicts are impacting them from a financial standpoint and also from a fiduciary liability standpoint. So I think this is going to be a little faster than it was in the retirement space from a litigation standpoint, but I think the opportunities are significant. You know, if you look at the retirement space, the lawsuits drove costs down, and we went from 3.5 basis point or 350 basis points to 50 basis points and lower. We went from average account balances of 17,000 to over 100,000. We went to auto enrollment and auto escalation and features that really are helping employees retire with dignity. That's the same opportunity in the healthcare space. We can be more proactive.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Talk a little bit about what you see happening in the healthcare space that will benefit both the employer and the employee because of this effort to become a better fiduciary.
Yeah. So I think what's happened in the healthcare space is that the value proposition of some within the healthcare ecosystem has been product driven. Let me bring you a new product, a new solution. And so employers have a lot of point solutions without any real return on investments. They didn't have a process for why they utilized or selected these point solutions. So I think employers are kind of overwhelmed by this because they have way too many vendors that aren't actually adding any value. So I think what we're going to start to see is a kind of more of a back to basics. You know, what is going to have meaningful impact on my employees and my bottom line as an employer? You know, and I think when we look at the retirement space, I started, we'd have 4 investment options: a stable value, a balanced, U.S. equity, and international equity. And then all of a sudden, everybody wanted choices, and we saw plans that had 1,000 mutual fund offerings, and now everybody started to narrow back to a more appropriate number. And that's what I think's happened in the healthcare space. They have so much, they need to come back to going back to the basics that have the ability to actually have meaningful impact on their employees. And that's where I see the market going, and understanding how the vendors are being paid and who is actually paying them. Because once you understand that, you start to recognize that perhaps some of the decisions that are being made aren't necessarily in the plan sponsor or the participant's best interest.
Well, and I would just underline that. I mean, there are so many misalignments in healthcare, and because of the lack of holding the plan sponsor responsible for their fiduciary duty, all too often healthcare costs have gone up and the quality of healthcare has gone down. And I truly hope that the Consolidated Appropriations Act, this idea of really helping employers take seriously their responsibility as a fiduciary in building a plan, will build better plans, creating better health outcomes at a significantly lower price. There are examples around the world where healthcare can cost half as much and be so much better. And it's because of this misalignments that we have not seen healthcare drive in that direction. But hopefully being accountable and actually waking up the business leaders to their fiduciary responsibilities will open the door to some of these innovations.
I agree. And I think when you look at the CAA 2021, and they have the removal of gag clauses within your covered service providers contracts, for a law to actually say that they have to remove restrictions for the employer to actually have access to their own data so that they can be prudent fiduciaries really tells you how problematic the healthcare market has been in the past. And there's an evolution taking place right now, and it's going to be driven based upon employers' need to drive better outcomes, both from a fiduciary standpoint and a cost standpoint. And I think that it's empowering But now employers need support in like, how do I actually facilitate these conversations? Because going back to, it's not an easy conversation. You have to have that, kind of open door policy with expectations of all the vendors that you're talking to.
Right. And in the end, the whole reason healthcare benefits are offered, the whole reason retirement benefits are offered, is to create better loyalty, which is what this podcast is all about. So it all dovetails together, that the more fiduciary, responsible an employer is, the more they're going to create greater loyalty.
I would agree. And hopefully the business leaders are listening and understand that this is an opportunity and not necessarily looking at it as this is
just a risk
undertaking and risk. But I mean, there's some work that needs to take place in order to get this done. But I think will be well worth it.
Nice. Jamie, tell us how our listeners can reach you or contact you.
Sure. My website is fiduciaryinabox.com, and you can reach me at Jamie at FIAB, that's fiduciary in a box.co. So Jamie at FIAB.co.
Nice. Jamie, thank you so much. This has been delightful. I appreciate it, and we'll catch you later.
Thanks so much for having me.